Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Bree, and today's video we're going to be going through all the books I read in the month of September. I read a total of 11 books, and it was also just a great month because it was my birthday, so I also bought quite a few books, which there will be a book haul coming soon. But in this, I read quite a few books that have been on my shelves for a while, and then also things I just was really excited about. So I thought I would organize it in kind of a fun way. So I ended up organizing it by my least favorite cover to my favorite cover, just because, I don't know, I wanted to and just decided to change it up a little bit. So that's what we're doing today. Let's get into it. Let's talk through all the books I read in September. Okay, starting with my least favorite cover, and that is going to be The Appeal. Really, the cover is just it's not really doing anything, you know? You kind of get what it's about. I mean, it tells you right on there, but there's just, I don't know, it's just kind of boring. So while the cover isn't my favorite, I did actually end up really enjoying this mystery. I would say overall it was probably around like the 4-star range. And this is following a bunch of different people, and it's really going through like their emails and different modes of communication to lead up to when someone is murdered and you're trying to figure out who was murdered and why. It's a really interesting premise from the way that the story is told in these email chains, and the way you get to understand different characters' motives by the way they speak to different people in different times, because they never knew that these emails and texts and stuff would become public knowledge. So I found that really interesting. I think overall the twist at the end and the way it ended just wasn't my favorite. I wasn't really that surprised by anything. I wouldn't say I guessed everything, but it just wasn't the most surprising. But I do really like the different way of telling this mystery, and so I definitely will be picking up more Janice Hallett in the future, because I think that there's another Janice Hallett out there that's probably going to be one of my favorites. I know she's also written the Twyford Code, and I think I will pick that up. Yeah, so that's The Appeal. I had a couple of you give me this recommendation, and I do think it's really fitting. It's definitely a mystery I enjoyed. So that's The Appeal. So the next book that I have is The Golden Key by Marion Womack. The cover I will put up here because I read it on ebook. It's not really given a whole lot. It doesn't really tell you what the book's about, and it's kind of generic. Now, this is the second book, and that is a great cover. It's creepy. It tells you a little bit more maybe what's about, but I originally started reading this and got about 50 pages in before I thought to look up at the author. And when I looked in the author's information, it told me that this was actually the second in the series, and so that's why I went back and picked up The Golden Key, which is very confusing because Goodreads does not list them as a series. So I believe this one was actually traditionally published and The Golden Key was a self-published book. So I went and read that so that I could read this, and I really did not like that one at all. It's about some girls who went missing in the woods a long time ago, and this woman is kind of investigating them, but then there's a guy who comes back to town and you're following his perspective, but you don't really understand why. And it gets into this whole mystery of what happened to these girls. It's got a lot of ties to the occult and spiritualism. The reason I didn't like this book, it's probably my least favorite book I've read this year. It's because the writing was so hard to follow. So a lot of things are left unsaid. So there'll be a lot of sentences where the speaker just trails off and you don't get the end to the sentence. So it leaves you wondering what they were saying. And I think the reasoning behind this is to be more ambiguous, to have to read between the lines a little bit more. But instead, it just made it confusing. There were so many times that I couldn't grasp what was happening, and I would have to read a page over and over again, and I still could not figure out what they mean. So I just kept moving on. And the sad part is, because I got 50 pages into this writing, it was really good. I was really into it and was intrigued by the plot and premise of it. But then reading that, it felt like two completely different authors. And I think that just is that this one has had an editor behind it. And the ending was supposed to be an ambiguous ending, but because the rest of the story was so confusing, the ending to this just didn't make sense. It just felt like the story ended and it was like we still needed 100 more pages. It just didn't make sense. So I was left feeling confused, and not in a good way. So yeah, I didn't like the cover, didn't like the book. And I would say too, if you're someone who wants to read this and have picked it up, I really think that you could skip that first one and just read this, because the reason that I went back to read is because there's another person with our detective that they've come together and they're now solving mysteries together, and so I wanted to get their backstory, but I didn't feel like I grasped any of their backstory because the plot was so confusing. So I really think you could just read this as a standalone if you wanted to. So yeah, that was The Golden Key. Then we have Tropic of Serpents by Marie Brennan. This one isn't like the ugliest cover in the world, but it's just kind of plain and not a lot to it. I do like the dragon, but you know, it's just kind of giving textbook, and I know that's what it's supposed to, but you know, just a little dry and boring for my taste. So we're following Lady Trent as she is learning about dragons and going on different, I can never say this word, exhibitions. In the first one, we're following her as we are seeing her go from childhood to finally adulthood and finally getting to study dragons. And in this one, it's a continuation of what left off on the last one and another trip to go study dragons in another area. So I think the series is going to follow her going to different areas to learn about different kinds of dragons. And within it, we get to see her interact with the local people, and there's always something that goes down, that goes wrong, and they have to work together to fix it. I've enjoyed the series from the aspect of the dragons and the way we get to see her doing so much of her job and learning so much about her passion for dragons and all that. But I will say that the thing I'm struggling a lot with this series is that it's supposed to be historical based, so I think it's supposed to be like a Victorian type society, but it's definitely a fantasy world. But it's reading like you would read a memoir from that time period, and the way they talk about people in different continents just kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I think it's supposed to be feeling like that's how this would have been told. And there are times where she says that she wasn't as open-minded as she is now, and so she's telling the story as she was then. And so she says she will be like, my prejudices kind of I didn't realize then that that was being prejudiced, but I don't feel like it's dived into enough that the implications of their travel and things like that and how they maybe impact a society that they're going into. Everything's kind of touched upon, but I'm just really, I don't know. I'm conflicted about it. I would say I'd probably give this about a 3-star. I think I will still continue the series, but I'll have to see how much I like it. It's kind of one of those where I really love the premise. Every time I go into it, I love that, but then the plot always leaves me feeling a bit meh by the end. So that is The Tropic of Serpents by Marie Brennan. I hope my explanations made sense. And yeah, hoping a little bit more from this series. So then I have A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This one's going in the middle of the pile as well for covers, because while I think it's cool and I like the jumping from different Londons, I like that visual, it's just also still a little boring, you know? I'm a little bit more of a maximalist, I think, in design style, so it just doesn't call to me quite as much. But this is a reread for me, and this is part of the Darker Shade series. So the first one is A Darker Shade of Magic. My husband and I have decided to do a little book club. I convinced him to do it with me, and so we're reading through the series so that we can read the new one that came out, which is Fragile Threads of Power. So this is a trilogy that finished out, and then the Fragile Threads of Power, wow, that is a tongue twister, is a continuation onto the series. So it's a new series, but it continues after the events of this trilogy. I had read the whole trilogy, but my husband had just read the first one. So we went through and he and I read this in September, and then we are going to be reading the second one very soon. So this was a reread, like I said, and I actually really enjoyed it, but I looked at Goodreads and originally had given it 5 stars, and I think this is more of a 4-star for me. There is a lot to this world, if you don't know. There were 4 different Londons, and people used to be able to travel between them. And there are fixed points that are similar in each London, but each London is very different and it has very different worlds and magic and stuff like that. And so we're following Kel, who is one of the last people who is able to move between these different Londons, and he does so for his kingdom, the Red London. He has to be kind of a messenger of sorts, and something happens and just he accidentally gets into some trouble that he shouldn't be into, and the story kind of goes from there. I don't want to give too much away because I think a lot of it comes later in the story, so I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't read the series. But we're also following Delilah Bard, or Lila, and she is a thief and a pickpocket in the Grey London. She is just trying to make her way in the world, and she kind of gets swept up into what's going on in this plot, and so you're getting multiple perspectives. And yeah, I really liked it. I would say I don't feel as strongly about it as I did when I read it. I think I read it back in 2017, and it just, over time, I see what it's building to, and I really enjoyed that, and just knowing the characters as they become later in the series was really fun for me. But I wouldn't say it was as engaging as I remember. But still, it's a very readable book. It's so accessible to if you want an adult fantasy and you kind of don't know where to start. This is a really easy one, I think, to get into and learn about different magic and different worlds and stuff like that without feeling overwhelmed. I felt like it explained it really well. Yeah, I just really liked it. I didn't realize, but it is it's supposed to be like kind of historical fantasy because it said it was 1819, and the Grey London is very reminiscent of London from London, the real world. And so, you know, I'm bound to love it if it's historical fantasy. So that's one of the reasons why I love the series. But I think that I will end up giving the other books in the series higher ratings because I just remember loving the series so much, and this one is still very nostalgic for me, but just not quite a 5-star. So that is A Darker Shade of Magic. And then we have A Study in Drowning, which I do enjoy this cover. I think it's really fun. It's got a very dark academia vibe, which I know is what it's been recommended as. And so I read this on audiobook because it actually came in super quick for my library, which I was surprised about because it's a new release. So I've always wanted to try Ava Reed, but I've been intimidated because her horror fantasy, there's a lot of triggers in her books, and I was worried about that. And this has a lot of triggers that I am actually very sensitive to, but I wanted to try it anyway because it was YA, and so I thought I could give it a go. So in this, there is triggers for SA and some abuse and some like neglect and stuff like that. And so it is a really hard thing to read, but I connected so much with Effie and her struggle and just the way she kind of viewed the world and the way she interacts with the world because of her traumas. I just really, really found that moving, and I connected with it a lot. And so that for me was like really good part of the book, even though it was so hard to read. But the plot itself is, we're following Effie, and she is in the architectural college, but she really wants to be in the literature college, but women aren't accepted. And so she enters this contest, this author that she's loved her whole life. She's grown up reading him, and he has died, and his son wants to redo the house because it's falling apart. So she gets asked to come to the house and do it. She wins the contest, and when she gets there, there's another student there, and he is in the literature college, and he is writing about her favorite author and his past, and they kind of come together because they want to really understand what the secrets behind this book of kind of fairy tales that has become so popular is all about. And they undertake this, and a lot of things happen. It's a very dark academia, almost horror to me. I think it is pretty horror based in certain aspects, and it's just got an uneasy feeling the whole time. It's definitely a good, like, creepy fall book. It's got this dark, misty cliffside vibe, and there's also a forest, and just feels very sinister the whole time. So I think it was a good one for fall. But the plot itself just wasn't the most engaging when we were learning about what was going on with the author. I think towards the end I did really like where it went, but there was a lot of slow bits in the middle. So I would say it kind of is like a middle of the road book for me. I think it's going to work really well for a lot of other people, but then I think some it won't as much. It'll be a little slower. So yeah, I kind of feel middle of the road because there are things that were really impactful and I really enjoyed about it, and then the plot itself was just kind of meh for certain points, but the end I really enjoyed. So yeah, I don't know how to really talk about this book. It's been the one that I've been trying the hardest to think about how I want to talk about it, and so I feel like I wasn't the most coherent in that one, but yeah. So that's A Study in Drowning. Now we're getting into covers that are more my favorite, and I was having a hard time ranking them. So this one is going to be kind of in the middle as well, and this is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. I really like this because it's got like Clue vibes to me, so I love the game Clue. It's one of my favorite games from childhood, so you know, it's great. So in this, we're following Ernie, and he is having a family reunion at a ski resort. And his brother, who's recently getting out of jail, is going to meet them there. And the first night they wake up and there's a dead body. And you start the book with Ernie saying that everyone in his family has killed someone, and it's very tongue-in-cheek, I think is the right word for that. It's got a lot of references to mystery books because he writes mystery books, so he'll say, now this is the point where the villain usually walks in and gives their monologue, but that's not how it's going to happen here, or stuff like that. And he'll like tell you what page the deaths are going to occur on, so you can actually know when a death is happening. But it didn't take away from the story at all. If anything, I think it made it better, and it was so entertaining and fun. I would say if you like something like Finley Donovan or the Thursday Murder Club, or some of those that have kind of a humor side to it, I think you might like this. I don't think it's going to appeal to every mystery reader though, because it's not a true like mystery. There's a lot that you kind of know, and it's not the most fast-paced or the most realistic. It gets very out there towards the end, but it was so fun and I really, really loved it, and I can't wait to continue on with the series because the dynamic between all these characters is just, it's so good. It was so interesting to follow, and there was just so much happening at this resort, like truly crazy. So I gave this 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was so fun and just a really lighthearted mystery that I've been looking for. I really like humor in my mysteries, so this was a hit and I'm so happy I picked it up. So then we have House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. I've had this since January, as it was a new release then, and I picked it up right away, and I have not gotten to it, but I finally read it and I am so happy I did. I don't know why I put it off for so long, but it was a perfect time of the year to read this kind of horror book. So this is following our main character, Sam, and she's going home to visit her mom because she's been furloughed from her job, which is studying insects in anthropology. And she goes back to live with her mom, and her mom's just acting strange, and the house has been kind of made over differently, and she doesn't understand. Her mom just feels like a completely different person, and there's just something off in this house. And as things go on, you start to learn more about the house and what's going on with her mom, and it just devolves from there. I don't think it's gonna appeal to a wide range of readers because, especially for horror people who really like to be scared by their books, this I think would fall in more to the cozy horror category, because there are things that are kind of eerie and scary, and there's some scenes that are scary, but for the most part, the just quirkiness of the character and the banter and stuff between people and just the humor that is in here makes it so much more of a cozy book than a true like scary horror book. It's also a short one, so if you are new to horror and you just want something that isn't very spooky but is easy to get into, I think this one is a good one to start with. But again, I just don't think it's going to appeal to the mass horror readers. T. Kingfisher is very flawless with her writing of characters and just making you feel like you know the character right away, and just writing characters that have personalities. I really like that about her writing, and I like the way her stories unfold and the just ridiculousness that always comes with them. So this one was no different. I really liked it, and yeah, I would say 4 to 4.5 stars. Next, we have this cover, which is The Undertakers by Nicole Glover. I really like the kind of star. It's supposed to be like the constellations of how they use their magic, and so it can make into different things, and this one protects her. No, and I really like a person on the cover, especially when it's a drawing of it, not a picture. So this is a historical fantasy series that is following Hetty and Benji as they take on cases in their community. They previously worked in the Underground Railroad, and they use their magic to help free slaves and bring them to the North. And this is post-Civil War, so now they're in Philadelphia and they use their magic to help solve mysteries in the community. And they're episodic in nature, though I do think that they build off each other, so you would want to read the first one before you read this one. In the first one, they're helping solve a mystery of what happened to their friend. So in this one, there have been some fires in the neighborhood, and a lot of people are losing their homes, and while they're investigating this, there's been some deaths that they start to see maybe are connected. I really like the characters, and I like the found family in here. I think Hetty and Benji's relationship, along with their friendships and found family with their chosen family, has been really, really good to read. I really enjoy the way that's done. I think for me in this one, the mystery was a little slower paced. Both of them kind of are, and so I think that some of it could have been a little shortened down, but overall, I just really like the way magic is used in here. We get to see a little bit more in this one about the magic system and the way different communities use magic. So that was really cool to see. And then we just get to see their friendships evolve even more and change. And I really enjoyed it from that perspective. I just think the plot was a little bit slower paced for me, so it didn't get quite to a 5-star, but I still really had a great time, and I would highly recommend this series because I do think it's an underrated series, especially if you're someone who likes episodic type books and you're looking for a historical fantasy mystery. I think this is a great one to choose. So this is third favorite cover, but I would say it's my favorite book of the month, and that is elatsoe by Darcy Little Badger. This blew me away. I have had this on my want to read list for so long, since it released really, and I just never picked it up, and I loved it so much. I had to go out and get a copy, so I read this on ebook, and then now I have my hands on a beautiful copy. And I would say for the cover, I mean, isn't that stunning? It's dog. It's a ghost dog going across multiple ghost dogs, and I just love the illustration, the way this is illustrated. It captures the vibe really well. So in this, we're following elatsoe, and she goes by Ellie for the most part, and she has a ghost dog because she's able to raise animals from the dead. She has a gift to raise things from the dead. She is also Lip and Apache, and in their culture, she cannot raise humans because they come out very not themselves and very evil, and so that is not something she does, but she can raise animals, and so she has her ghost dog and he goes along with her, and the book starts off where he starts getting very agitated, and she doesn't really know what's happening, but she knows that the last time he got this agitated was when her grandfather passed away, and so she is very worried because both her parents are out at the movie theater. So she immediately bikes her way to the movie theater, and when she gets there, she finds out that her uncle has been in a huge car accident and he ends up passing away. And so she is visited in the middle of the night by a strange dream where he tells her that he was murdered, and he tells her who did it, and he wants her to help avenge him. So her and her family go on this mission to help figure out what happened to her uncle Trevor. And her best friend Jay, he also helps tag along, and his family kind of gets involved, and it's a very interesting world because in this there are also vampires and I believe werewolves, but there's also descendants from the Fae, and so Jay is a descendant from the Fae, and he can use these Fae portals to kind of get places faster. So when she travels to go where her uncle lived, he can like take a portal to her, and that's really fun. So I really like the way the magic in this world works. It's just so seamless, and the world felt like ours, but with, you know, paranormal. So it was very urban fantasy feeling, and I love the way that storytelling was woven in, and just like the history of people in here, because she has all this history passed down, and she talks a lot about her 6th great grandmother and all the accomplishments she did, and whenever she's in need, she kind of thinks back to her 6th great grandmother, and you get to hear the tales of what her 6th great grandmother did. And so you get this like storytelling woven into the whole story where you get her family's history, and that I thought was so well done. The writing in here is just so great. I love the friendship between her and Jay, and the way that they banter with each other, and the true platonic friendship that they have is just so great. It was a perfect book for me. I think it was great. It's YA, but it does read a little closer to middle grade in my opinion, so just keep that in mind if you want to pick it up. It was my perfect kind of book. It was fantasy, it was mystery, there was a ghost dog, you know, animal companion, and family coming together. So yeah, I could not recommend this more. I don't know why I waited so long to read it. It's definitely a favorite, and probably will be in my top books because I'm just blown away by this. And I have another Darcy Little Badger. I have A Snake Falls to Earth, and I will be reading that very soon because I love this so much. Okay, we have 2 more. So second favorite book is The League of Gentlewoman Witches by India Holton, because this cover's got cottagecore vibes, which I just love. I love the houses and just all the little elements to it. So this had to be a favorite. Like I said, I like a more maximalist approach, so this one won me over. Now, this is the second in the Dangerous Damsels series. So the first one is The Wisteria Society for Lady Scoundrels, and this one we're following a witch, and she's on her way out, and she runs into a pirate, and they kind of have a snafu, and they both don't like each other, and then they end up having to work together because they are both trying to steal this certain gem, and for various reasons. And so it's a bit of a, I wouldn't call it fake dating, but they both think that they're kidnapping the other one, but everyone around them kind of knows that they're dating, but they don't realize that they like each other, or they're trying to deny it. And it's just a really fun way to have a romance, and I thought it was really well done. I would say it wasn't my favorite in terms of the 2 of them. I really liked The Wisteria Society more, but this one was still really fun, and I highly recommend the audiobook. The humor in this is just something that gets me. It just really is a fun thing to listen to. They're back and forth between characters, and you get to see characters from the first book in this one. So the first couple is also in this one, which I really enjoyed because I really liked that couple. And yeah, it just gets over the top and ridiculous, and I'm just having a good time. I found that fantasy romance is just kind of something I can really get into, especially when it's funny and just kind of not too serious. There are some smutty scenes, but it's not like all the time. I think there's like 1 or 2 scenes, and then it talks about it, but it doesn't like go into detail as much. So if you're someone who doesn't like a lot of spice, I would say this is lower spice. It's not no spice. So there's that. That is the League of Gentlewoman Witches. Last one, which is the favorite book, but I wouldn't say it's a favorite book. That makes sense. It's a favorite cover, not a favorite book. And that is Gallant by V. Schwab. I love this cover. I just think it gives these spooky vibes. I love the dual houses and the little circle. There's just something so creepy about this cover in like a very middle grade YA way that I just think is really good. And there's also a lot of like drawings throughout the book, which I think is really cool, that add to it. So that's why this one's the favorite book. I just think this is a gorgeous cover. Now in this we're following Olivia, and she is an orphan, and she is mute, and so she's not well liked among the other students, and they kind of pick on her, but then she kind of has made herself scary so that they don't mess with her. You're following her as she's kind of just not really getting along with anyone at this school, and then she gets a letter from a uncle who says that they have finally found her. They've been searching for her, and they would like to have her come live with them because her mom had passed sometimes earlier, I believe, and so they couldn't find her. So she goes to their house, and when she gets there, the house is kind of weird. There's some strange things happening. Some of the family is happy to have her there, and then there's some of the family who isn't, and the uncle that wrote this letter is no longer alive, so there's some confusion on how she actually got written this letter. So you're just kind of following her along as she figures out what's going on in this house and why her cousin does not want her there. There was nothing I could really pinpoint that I really disliked about it, but it just was something that I found kind of okay. The eeriness and the creepiness was good, but there was just something that made me feel distant, I think, from our main character Olivia and from the other characters. I didn't feel like I fully understood them, and the magic part of it and what actually is going on in the house was a little confusing to me. I didn't feel like we got all the answers that I wanted, even though we did get answers. I don't know, it's a hard one for me to talk about because I didn't love it, and I really can't tell you what I disliked about it, but it just was something that was kind of okay for me. I think V. Schwab has really good writing, and the way that she builds a world is something that I really enjoy, but there was just something missing from it, I think. Maybe if we had more time with the characters and to understand the house and like what's going on there, I probably could have liked it more. So yeah, it was just okay. Probably like a 3-star. So there you go. It's all the books I read in the month of September. I'm really excited for October because I think it's going to be great reading wise for all the autumnal spooky vibes, but I think September was good to ease myself into those autumn vibes. So yeah, I'm happy with what I read this month, and I had some favorites and some okay books, but I just had a great time. So isn't that all that matters? Okay, I'm gonna go. I will see you next time.